Welcome to the Gut Show. I'm Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gutivate, and I will be your host. My goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their guts better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season of the Gut Show, you can expect a weekly conversation covering a hot topic related to health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your personal dietitian. Everything we cover in this episode is meant to be educational and not a substitute for personalized care from your healthcare team. Welcome, and let's dive into today's episode. Are FODMAP troubles keeping you from enjoying your favorite foods? Our sponsor, FODZYME, can help you add these foods back to your diet. When sprinkled on or mixed into high FODMAP meals, FODZYME's novel enzyme blend breaks down the FODMAPs fructan, GOS, and lactose into easily digestible carbohydrates so that you can enjoy your meals without the worry. Learn more at FODZYME.com and use the code GUTSHOW to save 20% off any single order. So today's podcast episode actually includes a really renowned guest that I'm so excited to share with you, Dr. Mark Pimentel. He has been a leader in the SIBO world and research. And so in this episode, we talk a little bit more about what his team has done in terms of push research forward around SIBO and IBS. We also talked about some new developments in SIBO, breath testing, the gases that are produced, and even looking ahead towards treatment and things that will be coming out soon in terms of treatment. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. If you are not familiar with Dr. Pimentel's work, he is the professor of medicine at Cedars-Sinai. He has also been the executive director of the Medically Associated Science and Technology, or MAST program at Cedars-Sinai, which is a group of physicians and researchers that are dedicated to the study of the gut microbiome in order to develop effective diagnostic tools and therapies to improve patient care. Dr. Pimentel is also a professor of medicine at the Geffen School of Medicine, University of California in Los Angeles, or UCLA. As a physician and researcher, Dr. Pimentel has served as the principal investigator or co-investigator of numerous basic science, translational, and clinical investigations of irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, and the relationship between gut flora composition and human disease. This research led to the first ever blood test for IBS called IBS SMART, the only licensed and patented serologic diagnostic for IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. The test measures the levels of two validated IBS biomarkers, anti-CD/TB and anti-vinculin. This has been a game changer in the IBS world in terms of diagnostics and even patient confidence in their diagnosis. As a pioneering expert in IBS, Dr. Pimentel's work has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Annals of Internal Medicine, American Journal of Physiology, American Journal of Medicine, American Journal of Gastroenterology and Digestive Diseases and Scientists, among many others. Dr. Pimentel has presented at national and international medical conferences and advisory boards, and the list goes on. You can learn even more about Dr. Pimentel's work in the show notes. I've personally followed his work for the past few years and have really found value in learning from him as well as his team, and I've been really excited about what has been coming out from their team. So enjoy today's episode and my conversation with Dr. Mark Pimentel. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being here. You are the leading expert on SIBO, and so we couldn't really approach this topic in this way without you, so I really appreciate you giving us your time.
Oh, just glad to be here with you, Erin. It'll be fun.
Yeah, so this may be a little harder to do, but for those that haven't heard about SIBO, or maybe you've only heard the words but haven't really dug into it yet, can you give us a brief overview of what SIBO actually is?
Well, it's changing, and that's how science is. But the tradition was that SIBO was this proliferation of bacteria from the colon into the small bowel where it doesn't belong. You have too much bacteria there, and then it's eating your food, and now you're getting bloated. Well, not quite that simple. Actually, it's too much of only two bacteria. Maybe we'll get more deeply into that later. and they have taken over the microbiome of the small bowel, and they are so good at fermenting. They can ferment food 63 times faster than your normal microbiome, which means bloating, 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 and then, of course, changes in bowel function. So SIBO is changing, but basically the acronym means small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So too much of particular bacteria in the gut and out of proportion to what they should be.
Perfect explanation. And I know your team has been one of the leading forces in this space for many, many years, not just when it's been hot on the press and in the media. I'd love for you to brag on your team a little bit if you want to, and share maybe some of the things that you've been able to uncover in your lab, and really just shine a light on how new this is, but also how it has evolved over time.
Well, ironically, SIBO, that term has been around since the 1960s, but there was a very poor understanding of it up until just recently, and we've been spearheading a lot of that. The team is actually behind me. We have 25 people now that work for us, 6 postdoctoral scientists, ranging from people who do, RNA and expression work, to people who do biomarker development, to people who do sequencing of the microbiome. So we got like an amazing team back there, and a clinical research team that does the research to develop the new treatments that we're really hot on right now. So the team is awesome. But, the hot things are, we now break this SIBO concept into 3 concepts. One is the traditional SIBO, and we now know the bugs that cause that. The breaking EMO off, which is intestinal methanogen overgrowth, because they're not bacteria, they're methanogens, and methanogens are archaea, and archaea aren't even, they're their own kingdom. And so they're different. And then the third group, which was just recently, we've been developing new ideas around, that is hydrogen sulfide overgrowth. And that's the one that's the worst. That's the one that causes diarrhea. So now that we know the key organisms or the key microbes in each category, now it's easier to develop treatments, and we're well into that. So the funny thing about our lab, I'll brag one more time because you asked me to brag. This is what happens. You get me started, I'll go for 20 minutes. But it's these people. I mean, they do an amazing job, and I'm just sitting here in front of you talking, but they're doing the work. But the point is that knowing these organisms changes everything. It allows us to really delve into the depths of understanding these things and helping patients. And that's what we're, really up to, is to trying to get those new treatments to patients. And we have them. But one last thing, anytime you hear me talk, we're usually 2 years ahead of what I can say. So think about that, because we already knew about hydrogen sulfide and all this stuff 2 or 3 years ago. And don't think we were resting on our laurels waiting for it to come out to talk to you. We are already 2 or 3 years ahead of that with things that can help people. So I want people to be optimistic, if I can say that.
Absolutely. And that's one reason I wanted you to brag and talk about your team a bit more, because I think in this world of, social media, and everyone sharing everything that they believe or think, mixed also within conventional healthcare, we hear a lot about these kind of controversies, right? Of, well, I don't believe in that, or that may not be real, or, there's a lot of opinions, especially around SIBO. But I think what's missing sometimes is the talk of how much research has actually been done and what all goes into you making a statement to say, oh, we know that there are 3 gases produced, and there are, specific organisms producing these gases. It's not something that you just came up with overnight, right? It's something that has been really well studied by a team over a long period of time.
Exactly. And, I like to believe that you, as a scientist, you need to keep an open mind. So when people come up to me and say, well, what do you think about this herb for SIBO? I said, well, I can't say it doesn't work because nobody's tried it, or they have tried it, or there's, science has to tell you the truth of whether something works or not. And if it hasn't, it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just hasn't been tested. And I think we get into trouble sometimes where we dismiss a concept, not having read about it, not having done the homework about it. But what I try to do with our team of academicians, that's, at a number 2 hospital in the country, Cedars-Sinai, is do the science, prove the concepts, get to the therapies, prove those. And this is long, hard work. So, if people want to say, "Oh, I don't believe in it," well, read the papers. We're doing the credible research. We just need to continue and march along.
Absolutely. So getting into one of those topics, I know that you guys have been focused on, and that is the validation of breath testing to identify these gases, right? So you identified that these gases are being produced, and then you correlated that with symptoms, and now you've gone even further than that. But back to the breath itself, breath testing has been an area that's been pretty controversial in conventional medicine.
Of course. Yeah.
But that has recently changed, right? Where there's actually less controversy when it comes to the science and the work that you've done. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of breath testing, validation, our trust in these tests, and then as a patient, what to look for in a test?
So think about this. Since the 1980s, we've been doing breath testing. Nobody, and I mean almost nobody, has ever looked at breath test versus what's going on in the small bowel by culture and sequencing. It hasn't been up until now that we could do some of these fancy things. Then when we started to sequence the small bowel, we realized you can't sequence the small bowel like you do the bacteria and stool. It requires a totally different methodology. In fact, it took us 2 years to figure out the way to get the bacteria, everything that's there, and identify it, because we had to create new methods. So if you don't have the methods, because they never were developed, and you can't compare breath test to all the methods that are now developed, then breath test was never really, I'm not saying breath test was wrong, because we proved it was right, but it wasn't until last year when we published our paper that we were able to prove it's right. And what we showed is that if you do the 3 gas breath test, hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, and you compare that to symptoms, and you compare that to the microbiome, and you compare that to culture and all the other things, the hydrogen sulfide on the breath is proportional to the diarrhea. It is proportional to the bugs that produce hydrogen sulfide. So the breath test is actually measuring, and the higher it is, the more those bugs are in your gut. So it is accurately measuring the bugs in the gut, and that those bugs cause diarrhea. Same for methane, same for hydrogen. So that paper last year really puts a pin in, okay, breath testing, as long as you do all 3, is now validated against the human condition and the microbiome using the latest and validated technologies. So for the first time, we now know breath testing is accurate. But you needed that 3rd gas, because hydrogen gets used to make hydrogen sulfide and methane. So if you don't have those other 2 gases, you don't understand really sort of the fermentation dynamics of what the breath test actually means. I know that's a complicated answer, but the point is, we now know you have to measure all 3, and we now have validated that all 3 correlate with the human condition and the bugs. And that really is the bottom line.
Absolutely. And I'll link to that paper if anyone's interested in diving deeper, or maybe presenting that paper with their healthcare team to again, work as a team to get some answers for them. But I did want to set the stage there, because I know that's something people are always asking, and it's something that we talk about a lot. And when we then get into treatment, we have to know, right, what we're looking at to even begin that. You mentioned hydrogen sulfide, and I want to get into that a little bit more, because this is the newer kid. You always say the new kid on the block, but not that new. We've seen it for a little while. There's a lot of talk around hydrogen sulfide in the social media space and the functional medicine world about how this gas may be toxic to the gut and might be the link between increased intestinal permeability, like we see with IBS, maybe this kind of overlap with immune and altered immune activation. Is there anything to that? And now that you've identified these hydrogen sulfide producers, is this something that you're seeing that might influence treatment or even future biomarkers?
So biomarkers, yes, we're on the trail for that, but breath test is a biomarker, so we're pretty good for now. And then in terms of hydrogen sulfide, it's very toxic to the intestinal lining. And so the intestinal lining has mechanisms. In fact, we showed in that study that when you have hydrogen sulfide, that the mechanisms in the lining of the gut are geared up to try and break it down, get rid of it, break it down, get rid of it, because it's not good for you. And so it doesn't get a lot in your circulation because the body's trying to deactivate it. And there's inflammation associated with it. And there may be permeability issues, as you said, and we've shown that in another paper that came out this summer. So So lots going on, and you'll see another paper that's coming out. It's in major revisions now with a journal that really, again, puts another pin in this whole hydrogen sulfide story because of what we're actually seeing in animal models of when we give these bugs or when these bugs are present. So hydrogen sulfide, not good. But everything's a balance, right? You can't have zero. You can't have zero methane. You have to have the right amount. And so it's not about cratering the microbiome to make you better. It's about modifying it so that it's correct.
Absolutely. And do you think that that now puts together more of that link between IBS and SIBO, especially with hydrogen sulfide? I know you've already identified maybe the role of post-infectious IBS and SIBO being very much the same thing in a way, or kind of versions of each other, I guess. But what about hydrogen sulfide in that conversation with seeing, the drivers of IBS, if you will, that we've been able to see? Do you think that that is more related than we even thought before?
Well, I think what this paper coming up is showing. We've already presented it at a scientific conference, so I could tell a little bit about it. But basically, we gave post-infectious IBS to animals, and post-infectious IBS evolves into DIBS, the diarrhea subtype, and then the animals go into two different categories of bad: the hydrogen bad and the hydrogen sulfide bad. And now we know what the hydrogen sulfide bad looks like. But basically, you get pain and visceral hyperalgesia. You get changes in, or leaky gut, if you want to call it that, and then changes in your inflammatory response. All bad things that you're trying to fight off. So we see all of that, and it mimics exactly what we see in humans. So it's really interesting. But all of this creates an avenue for understanding how to break it, to stop it, and maybe we stop it at the food poisoning, so you never get IBS. Maybe we stop it, some way halfway because you're evolving into IBS, and we break that before it happens. Or maybe we develop, which we are, new treatments for the actual specific gas microtypes, and then have tailored treatments depending upon who you are, what you have.
Are FODMAP troubles keeping you from enjoying your favorite foods? Our sponsor, FODZYME, can help you add these foods back to your diet. When sprinkled on or mixed with high FODMAP meals, FODZYME's novel enzyme blend breaks down the FODMAPs GOS, lactose, and fructan into more easily digestible carbohydrates, so you can enjoy your meals without the worry. I've personally used FODZYME all around the world, from Paris to New York City to my hometown of Nashville, and this has helped me eat out with more confidence, knowing I'm supported for my biggest triggers of garlic, onion, dairy, and beans. It is possible to enjoy food and eating out again without the worry of digestive discomfort, and FODZYME can help. Learn more at FODZYME.com and use the code GUTSHOW to save 20% off any single order. And so with that, and thinking about, okay, we think of IBS as a chronic disorder, and I know you don't agree with that, and I think there's reasons for that, right? You're seeing these biomarkers of disease, so maybe this is more of an organic disease state. Maybe this is us breaking it down, that umbrella, by looking at these specific organisms and their role. Whenever it comes to treatment, do you believe that SIBO will be something that we say, okay, we can fix it, treat it, cure it? Do you think it will be a condition or a disease state where we say maybe it's in remission? Will it be more an autoimmune disorder? Like, where do you see this going with the research that you've done, if you're able to share that?
Well, your first comment sort of harkens me back to I published our first paper ever on the possibility that SIBO and IBS are related. And somebody wrote an editorial saying, IBS and SIBO, the cart lands squarely in front of the horse. And so what they were saying in that paper was, IBS by definition is not a disease. And by definition of not being a disease, if you find SIBO, you got to take it out, and what's left is IBS. My response to that is, I never want to study a disease I can never figure out, because by definition, it's not figure-outable, because everybody said, no, this is a non-figure-outable thing, and we'll leave it at that. I think that's sad. We want to find the causes of IBS, cure them, and treat them. And we think 60% of IBS-D is SIBO and this hydrogen sulfide, and in the constipation side, similarly, methane. Well, that's fixing 60% of the whole IBS umbrella. I think that's a good accomplishment. And you can call it SIBO, you can call it IBS, you can call it however you like. But I don't consider IBS a syndrome. I consider it a disease. And because the syndrome gives the impression that a patient is a syndrome, it's just a thing. It's just a constellation of symptoms. A disease is legit, right? So by the definition, by the terms we use for IBS, we delegitimize patients. And I think that's sad. And I think patients feel it. They don't like the word syndrome because it feels, like it's just nobody cares about it. Well, I do, and I want to fix this, and we are validating it as a disease. And then the other 40%, there may be other things, but I think autoimmunity is from food poisoning is what drives these changes in the gut. And that's how we develop that anti-CDTB anti-vinculin antibody profile, which is really predictive of IBS and present in about 60% of D. There's that 60%. Every time we talk about how SIBO, post-infectious, and all fits into the DIBS particularly, it's about 60% every time it comes up to that number. So I think that's where we're landing. 60% of this is SIBO. If you want to change it, you want to call it just SIBO and get rid of it out of the IBS, it doesn't matter to me as long as patients get better.
Absolutely. And yeah, it does seem like from your work and even just hearing you speak and learning from you over the many years, it seems like that umbrella of mystery we used to say of IBS, where it's all these different subtypes of patients that show up, right, is getting a little bit more identified with some of these biomarkers of SIBO and bacteria, gases, and then even what we're learning of overlaps with things like endometriosis, PCOS, the hormone side of things, the immune side of things. Like, we're learning so much. Which leads me to ask about your small bowel microbiome mapping. Small bowel microbiome mapping. I know that you guys presented on this even at DDW, a conference for digestion professionals earlier this year, and it's pretty incredible to see the level of identification that you've been able to find in the small bowel and how that has then driven your work with SIBO. But do you see that? One, tell us what that is. But then also, what's the potential role of that, like simply being able to test and identify what's going on in the small bowel in terms of the microbes that are present, and maybe uncovering other parts of this umbrella that might be there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the whole point is to try and find those subcategories. So, if we figure out 60%, it doesn't mean we're ignoring the other 40. There's more to learn. There's more things that we may evolve or we may understand over time. And there are things that are emerging. So I'll keep that to myself for now, only because we haven't published it yet. But I think this study that you're referring to, called the Reimagine study, you're going to see some very explosive data coming out, not about just IBS, but about other single conditions. For example, polycystic ovary syndrome. Our team has just identified a bug that produces testosterone and may be important in polycystic ovary syndrome. So, and that was presented at the Endocrine Society meeting, and other conditions, which I won't get into. But it's really, really cool what we're discovering, and it's going to help a lot of diseases besides irritable bowel syndrome. But IBS is close to my heart, so I think it's. But I want to ask you a question. I mean, just if for an IBS patient, I mean, in my mind, if I was an IBS patient, I would sort of be like, yeah, if somebody told me sort of what was causing my IBS, even if they couldn't figure out, that's a big leap forward for me because I can wrap my head around it. If it's just this nebulous thing, you having spoken to probably many IBS patients on your various journeys, that's what they want, right? They want answers, even if they don't have the best treatments yet, but they're coming. I think they want answers, and I feel that way in my clinic, and they feel very good to see us because we're providing some of those.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And you may not know, I'm actually an IBS patient since I was, as a child. I always laugh. I say, I don't meet the criteria anymore. So what does that mean? Does it mean it went away? Does it mean I'm in remission? Because I don't have pain anymore. But as a kid, most of my life was, pain and constipation. And I never got answers. And so it's very close to my heart too, because, you live part of your life, missing out on things that you should be involved in. And then also now as a grown up and seeing the world in a different light, thinking about aging and longevity and health and other pieces of my health history and story, I feel like there probably was some things that were missed in my care that could have helped with my own development and, you know, other parts of my own health. And I would hate to think that that would be working against me with the rest of my life. And I know a lot of my patients are the same, where yes, they like a diagnosis and it's okay, but they also really want to know what the answers are for that and why things are connected, but no one's helping them make sense of that piece. Like you mentioned, of, you know, autoimmunity possibly with, you know, diarrhea attached to it, or the foodborne illness connection. You know, we've had that, but patients still are left kind of confused of like, well, is it going to go away? Or what do I do about it? How do I fix it? And then methane, I know is a huge one in constipation. I know we're getting low on our time, so I want to get to this quickly, but we talked about, you know, hydrogen sulfide and some of the things that you've been able to find there. I feel like methane, as a constipation person myself, kind of gets left out a bit. Not really, but what do we know about methane? Do we know that it also may contribute to intestinal permeability? Do we think, you know, with the PCOS overlap, like maybe is methane somehow related to maybe that connection, or endometriosis connection, or thyroid connection that we see with constipation? Is there anything there with methane?
Well, so the methane story had more data to it than the hydrogen and hydrogen sulfide story up until recently. And yet it just, as you said, you're right. You know, it just sort of drifts in this weird direction where people don't talk about it as much. When they talk about CIBS, they focus on the SIBO, and the EMO gets sort of, oh, that, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that in the literature. But things are changing. Like if you look at the recent developments in the papers that I talk about that are ours, but there are many others that are from other groups, they've changed so much in the last 2 years that the IBS guidelines sort of missed the window. They happened before all this new modern development. But the Indian guidelines in Southeast Asia were able to capture this new information. And the Indian guidelines now say for Asia, if you have IBS, you better look for SIBO because it's there 60% of the time, or whatever they state. And intestinal methanogen overgrowth causes constipation, and food poisoning causes IBS. These were statements that were not made in the American guidelines because they predate some of this really hardcore cause and effect kind of studies that we now have. So stay tuned. I mean, the information's slow, unfortunately, and I know for patients that they have a hard time understanding why we go so slow, but it's a methodical process that's frustrating for us as much as it is for the patient.
So now for the $1 million question, which I know is the big one. How do patients actually recover from SIBO, EMO, hydrogen sulfide production? I know you're working with this clinically as well as scientifically, so you're seeing this on multiple levels. But what do we actually do? Do we need to find the root cause, as some may say, of the SIBO and fix that? Do we just treat? Are there more layers to this? What does recovery really look like?
So there are patients where you treat their SIBO once and I don't see them for 2 years. Don't need to do much more for them. They're literally 80, 90% better. There are patients, perhaps like you, where it just sort of dissolves over time. The SIBO has corrected, or EMO, or whatever you had at the time has sort of adjusted in the correct direction. For example, with food poisoning, that antibodies and the autoimmunity drifts down, kind of like your COVID vaccine. You know, you get protection for a few years, in this case, damage for a few years, but then as the antibody diminishes, the effect goes away. And we see that. So one of the things we're working on is, if we get rid of the antibody, can we cure this? That's a big thing we're working on. Now that we know the clusters of bugs in each category, we already have drugs for each cluster that we're testing in the lab and moving into clinical trials. So we want to get the bugs that are causing the problem down without affecting the other bugs. Let them be normal and allow the garden to grow beautifully without the weeds. And I think that's our goal. And we get there in many patients, but we don't get there in all, which is why we're continuing the work and trying to find the better things.
Perfect. And I think us all working together as a team, like you mentioned, right? Open minds, bringing together all the puzzle pieces we can from as clinicians, from our experiences with patients, but especially as patients, as you also mentioned, right? Bringing in the things that you're doing that are working well for you, or what you're learning and working with your team as a true team might be the answer or part of the answer to get there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for your work in this space, for validating, IBS community concerns, and being a leader for all of us. We definitely appreciate that, and for giving us your time to educate us even more.
Well, thank you, because I know you do a lot of good work passing on information to these people and educating, and or doing your own job with counseling people on the correct lifestyle and food. So all of that also helps. And if we all stick on the straight and narrow and stick to the science, we're going to make good progress. So I'm very optimistic.
Me too. Are you really fed up with your IBS symptoms controlling your life? Are you frustrated with feeling like you're going in circles day in and day out, and you seem to try things on your own? You're taking in all the information, but you're still finding yourself stuck. If that's you, I invite you to join the Master Method membership. This is a science-backed holistic program for IBS that we've developed with you in mind. It covers what to do to support digestion, how to support the drivers of IBS, including gut-brain connection, your microbiome, altered motility, and even altered immune activation. We also talk about how to support your nutrition and your overall health through your diet, with a focus on what to actually add to your diet versus only what to take away. And we guide you through all 3 steps of the low FODMAP diet process in many different ways if you want to use that evidence-based tool for IBS. This program has been proven to work with many with IBS because it truly does approach health and well-being from a whole body perspective, while also targeting IBS specifically. So if you're ready to get guidance so that you can take control of your symptoms, join a community of others who are working on their IBS and ready to connect with those who get it, and lifestyle resources to help you every step of the way, then join the membership today at the link in show notes.